Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host. But before I introduce our guest for today, as always, I just want to remind everyone that our podcast is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, on our program today, we'll be featuring Dr. Karen Janson from Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Janson had a very successful 28-year career as a pediatrician, mostly in her home state of Michigan. And then in the spring of 2018, she and her husband relocated to Florida in search of kinder, gentler weather. And during that move, she decided to leave clinical medicine to become the publisher of a lifestyle magazine designed for medical professionals. Dr. Janson earned her MD at Michigan State University in 1988 and also completed her pediatric training at the Michigan State University-affiliated hospitals in 1992. She practiced with a large group of pediatricians in East Lansing until 2003, when she relocated to South Haven, Michigan, where she was the only pediatrician in town for the next 13 years. It was after moving to Florida that she decided to leave clinical practice and start a new career. So now let's hear Dr. Karen Janson tell us her story. So I'm very happy to be talking today with Dr. Karen Janson in Jacksonville, Florida. Karen, thank you very much for joining us today and welcome to Prescription for Success.
I'm honored to be with you, Randy. Thank you.
Great to have you. So, I know your schedule has to be really busy because you're counting down the days to the launch of a magazine, Medical Professionals Magazine. That's got to be pretty exciting. And it was very generous of you to spend some time with us today. So thanks again for that. And of course, I want to spend some time talking to you about the magazine. But to get us started, I really want to talk about your beginnings and what your life was like before you became a magazine publisher. So let's just start at the very beginning or sort of at the beginning, and that's the decision about medical school. Was that something that was a long-time goal for you since childhood, or did it come along later? How did that come about?
Thank you. I would say my journey to medicine started in high school. In hindsight, there were two noteworthy things that happened in those years. One was that I was in the same class as Madonna, the queen of pop.
No kidding.
That's true.
That's fabulous.
So I've had fun loosely tracking her music and film career, just like the rest of the world. But the other noteworthy event was my high school biology teacher, Mr. Fliss. He introduced me to Gregor Mendel and Mendel's work on inheritance and the field of medical genetics. In my sophomore year of high school, I was raising fruit flies in my bedroom during Christmas vacation so I could study the rates of recurrence of various genetic characteristics.
I remember that experiment, and you had to separate the males from the females and that kind of thing, right?
Exactly. What type of wing shape they had. And I was hooked on genetics.
So that was your inspiration to get into medical school. And you got your medical education at Michigan State. Was Michigan your home? Is that where you grew up?
As of 8th grade, it was.
Okay.
My family explored lots of states prior to that, but 8th grade, we landed in Michigan. And therefore, I applied to Michigan State University. I took a circuitous route to medicine, even from my love of genetics. I went to Michigan State University and earned my Bachelor of Science in Psychology, Sociology, and Statistics. with the notion that...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That is a little bit of an unusual approach. So tell us that story.
Well, I was working towards the notion that I would earn eventually a master's in genetic counseling. So I was building a background of both science and counseling skills so I would be ready for that field of study.
That makes a lot of sense.
And after marrying the love of my life, Jim Janson, I was lucky enough to enroll in a master's program at Michigan State University.
So that's an interesting point. You got married while you were still in undergraduate school, or just as about the time you were about to start your master's program. Is that right?
Just between the two programs. That's correct.
Right. And then on to medical school, and I'm really interested in hearing about that. Now, you started a medical school. Well, I can't do the arithmetic on it, but I started a medical school in the mid to late 70s, and you started in the late 80s. In my medical school class, there were, I don't think it could have been more than a dozen, maybe 15 women in my class. And I'm wondering what it was like in your medical school class. Were there lots of women or relatively few, or what was it like for women at that stage?
The university actually was discussing that when they were welcoming us to our first days of medical school and introducing themselves to us. They noted that for the first time, the class was balanced with both female and male medical students. So that was noteworthy.
So I should think, I mean, it's hard to know what things would have been like if you had been in different circumstances, but I should think that was a little easier for you possibly. I mean, there's nothing easy about medical school, but just being an environment where there were equal numbers of men and women must have been somewhat more comfortable for you. Do you think I'm right about that? Or did you feel just because the field of medicine was still certainly dominated by men at that stage that you were still at a little bit of a disadvantage? What did it feel like?
My mother was a feminist, and she had taught me from the first days that I could do anything I wanted as long as I put my mind to it. When I wanted to study genetics, I created a program at Michigan State that allowed me to study genetics right there in our hometown. And when I realized after attending my first genetics conference that if I just knew what those doctors knew, I could really do a good job and wanted to go to medical school, my mother's heart was still with me saying, well, go for it then, do it. And so I was on a mission to learn and be valuable.
Well, that's great. It sounds like the notion that there was no reason why you couldn't succeed was implanted from an early age, and that's very, very fortunate for you.
I agree.
But otherwise, did you find that medical school was more challenging, less challenging, about the same as undergraduate school? What were your medical school years like?
I had one experience with an internal medicine physician that I recall that brought together your question and my experience. This was an internal medicine doc who was grilling each of us, wanted us to be prepared for the morning, understood. And as she looked at me, she said, don't you ever wear a pink sweater on my ward again.
Really?
This was a woman speaking to me.
Wow.
I was flabbergasted. But that's the only time I really recall my gender being an issue for the day.
What do you think was behind that remark? Why would the color of your sweater be of any interest to your attending, I wonder?
As I reflected on it, I think she thought I looked soft or ladylike, not doctor-like. And I was comfortable being both. But I didn't challenge her. I just respected her turf. Chances
are, at her stage of development, she had probably been through some challenging times as a woman in the field of medicine, don't you think?
I do. I definitely do. She was a few years ahead of me, and she probably helped pave those roads.
But apart from that, were there any particular challenges in medical school, particularly during the clinical years, or did it all seem kind of fun and something that you really enjoyed? What was it like in those clinical years?
Medical school is expensive. And as I was following my dreams, I was unfortunately accruing a bill. And so my husband, who was also fairly newly graduated and a teacher in elementary level, was going through the annual series of, you've done a wonderful job. We're so glad you're with us. The students love you. The parents love you, but we have to pink slip you and we'll let you know if we have funds for you next year.
Wow.
So about the third time that happened, I took a time out and said, at what point will I stop my education and start working and making money for our family? And at what point can I contribute like my husband has been? So I did take a year off between my third and my fourth year of medical school and returned to genetic clinic and was counseling families and working with families and using the knowledge that I had gained in medical school in that atmosphere, but was again counseled by the director of the genetic clinic that he didn't see me as finished. He saw me either pursuing a PhD or pursuing an MD and said, when you're ready to go back, we'll let you. And he was right. I was ready to go back and finish my MD.
That's interesting. And I recognize that as a really terrific benefit for you. And again, if I can be a little bit personal, during my time in medical school, which started about 10 years earlier than you did, there was no slowing down. We were very pressured to keep going. And in fact, at the time that I was in medical school, the University of Alabama School of Medicine was experimenting with a program where you finished your medical education in 3 years. It was quite grueling, and people were really burned out, and they actually abandoned that. But I noticed that in the modern day, there is considerably more flexibility, and people are given the opportunity to go at their own pace. And I gather from what you're telling me that you think that was a terrific benefit for you. Am I right?
I knew even at that time that I was very fortunate to be able to return and to be able to complete my degree.
Again, I'm assuming it sounds like you had your eye on pediatrics early on. Am I correct about that?
It evolved. I took my training seriously. I wanted to be there for each and every patient, but I noticed that if it was a child who was ill or a child who was injured, I really rose to the occasion. Whether it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning, I wanted to do everything I could for that patient. And so I learned as I looked around that pediatrics was my home.
And those kids really do get very sick in the middle of the night, don't they?
Well, that's just it about pediatrics. Unfortunately, they can become very ill very fast, but fortunately, they can also turn around when given the opportunity. And that was my mission. And I liked teaching the families. I liked educating parents. The greatest compliment I ever received was a mother or a father telling me I helped them be a better parent. That was something that kept me going. But I had my time in the delivery room with premature triplets and reducing elbows in the emergency room, managing meningitis in the ward, and then working through all the outpatient pediatric cases that my colleagues get to do now.
So it sounds like your life as a house officer was actually relatively enjoyable, not to say that it was not hard work from time to time, but you never, it sounds to me as if you never really felt like, I don't know if I can stand it until this is over or anything of that sort. You sort of enjoyed it. Is that correct?
I would stick with the hard work answer. It was hard work. And yeah. I was fortunate to be co-chief of staff my junior and senior year of residency. And during that time, I was really lobbying to protect myself, my colleagues, and our patients from shifts that were extraordinarily long. And we really rallied to limit shifts to 24 hours so that people could go home, get their notes done, regroup, and come back and be on task for the next patient. And that was a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation. There were plenty of physicians who felt like they had muddled through or survived. Why not us? We were to go through the same challenges they had experienced, but I felt it just made more sense to get somebody who wasn't bleary-eyed looking over that child.
Well, good for you. And I think it is certainly good for the modern day physician, and good for patients as well, I might add, to recognize the fact that human beings do have a physical limit. And I can assure you that there were no such considerations during my training, as you can imagine. It was back in the dark ages.
I absolutely understand that, yes.
My hat's off to all of those in your era that brought about those changes, because it's not an easy thing to do. As you know, the system is very difficult to turn around. So congratulations to you for doing that.
I appreciate that. And there have been people in all areas of medicine spending more and more time, energy, and resources on patient safety. This was just an early opportunity to think about those things.
Absolutely. So after completing your residency, you remained in the East Lansing area in private practice. Tell us about those early years and what it was like.
I was very fortunate because I had married a local man. I was well known to the community as I was graduating and looking at the local community for a position to work. And I was given several different choices. I was very fortunate to work with a group of 9 pediatricians for Blue Cross Blue Shield, who was running an HMO pediatric care clinic, and they were outstanding providers. And so I was able to watch their efficiency and their customer care and learn from them at team meetings, and then try to return the favor as we would bring in nursing students and medical students who would want to learn from myself and from those colleagues. It was a great atmosphere for 11 years.
Yeah, it sounds like you were very fortunate there, because I think everybody in the field of medicine knows that the learning is not done. When you finish your residency, there's still quite a bit to acquire and to know, and it sounds like you're in a great position for that.
Yes, I remain friends with several of those practitioners, even though we're several states away now. That's another gift.
So you really, it sounds like you really enjoyed private practice from the outset, and you continued to do that for quite a while. In fact, you changed practices, did you not, after about 10 or 11 years?
Exactly. Even though I was fortunate to participate in the governance council and act as chief of pediatrics and associate medical director for a time with that position, Blue Cross Blue Shield came to the realization that they wanted to step out of the medical delivery business and return to just insurance processing. And so they eventually closed the 9 clinics that had been available to that community. And so I took the opportunity to explore Michigan further and was delighted to find a lovely position in a small tourist community called South Haven, which was on the shores of Lake Michigan, and join South Haven Community Hospital, which became part of Bronson Medical Hospital System.
And how was that different, or was it very much alike with respect to your previous practice? Was there a transition? What was that transition like?
I moved from a setting with 9 other wonderful colleagues that were doing full-time pediatric medicine to a setting where I had a lovely physician's assistant, and I was the pediatrician. And the next pediatrician was 30 minutes, 45 minutes away, depending whether you went south or north.
That's a little bit of culture shock, I bet.
That was a difference. And I was grateful that my skills were to the point where if I wanted to make a phone call for assistance, I certainly would. I would call Grand Rapids or call Kalamazoo and build relationships with those practitioners and those subspecialists. So I really wasn't as isolated as one might have imagined. I had wonderful connections, wonderful colleague connections.
But clearly it was a pretty good fit, because you stayed at that for another decade or so. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Lovely community, friendly people, pretty town. So it was a nice place to be.
So what was the story behind the next big change, moving out of Michigan? Where did that all come about?
I think there were several things that were happening at the same time. One was that I had always taken pride in really listening to the child and the family in front of me and collaborating on a medical plan. But medicine in general was ramping up, and there were obligations to see more and more patients to be able to balance the books at the end of the day. There were also new obligations to enter the record into an electronic medical record system. And I was originally...
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, right?
Yeah, I was very open to the new technology. I knew it was a freight train coming. You might as well jump on board. I was asked to write the pediatric templates for our community hospital and write the well-child examinations for the EMR, which I gladly did. But once the program was launched, I felt the program was simply not ready for prime time.
Did it ever get ready for prime time?
Not in my tenure. It remained tedious and inflexible. I think my biggest wish was that the assessment and plan had been not limited to 140 characters, the size of a tweet. If I wanted to adequately summarize the antibiotics a child had just been exposed to manage chronic otitis media, or this older child's mental health concerns, I would have to cut and paste my few extra sentences into that assessment and plan before I could move on. And that was silly time consumption.
Yeah, I have to say that I have not seen the electronic medical record, and I've seen several during my last 15 years in private practice. I haven't seen the electronic medical record that actually serves the patient and serves the physician. It serves something else, and my suspicion is that what it serves is the billing office. Was that your overall impression of the electronic medical record, or do you see it in a different light?
Oh, I think you're absolutely correct, Randy. That's exactly the origin of the EMR. It was a method to reduce fraud and to accurately bill and to enable checks and balances. And I'm not opposed to that. I just wish that perhaps medicine had been more involved in the design of these systems, because as we know, it's expensive to change them once they've been incorporated into practice. And it would have made my life smoother at the time.
And everybody else in the field, I should think.
I have heard similar stories. I have.
So at some point, you made the decision that it was time to move on to something else, and there was actually another physical change. You left Michigan and made a stop in Virginia. So why don't you tell me about that before we get you into Jacksonville, where you are now? What was there had to have been some story behind living the territory where you had lived by far the greater part of your life and making a great big geographic change. What was that like?
It was the snow. I was starting to feel restless. I was, again, working through the PACE and working through the EMR, and I was starting to feel uncomfortable with Michigan snow. I had lived it for many years, and although the state is absolutely beautiful 5 months of the year, after Halloween, it was just a bit too cold and gray for me. So I persuaded my husband to please move south, where we would have a more pleasant climate and be outdoors exercising and getting fresh air, just like I was telling my patients. So I did accept a position in Virginia.
Yeah, I spent several years, the first 13 years of my private practice I spent in the Tampa Bay area. And I ran into lots and lots and lots of people just like you. They were trying to escape the weather.
Well, even after our first year in Virginia, I looked at him one more time and said, could we go just a little further south? And this time, I totally did homework with Jim. We looked at the Carolinas and we looked at all of Florida and Arizona and really made a wish list and surprised ourselves that we found Jacksonville and St. Augustine to be a wonderful fit. And so that's where we moved. It has great weather. It's on the ocean.
Well, I can understand why the area would have some allure for you. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Beautiful history, lots of amenities. So that's been our new home.
Was that, had you made the decision to get out of medicine at that point, or when did that come about, and what was that decision like?
Well, it was about the same time, because as I was packing up my Virginia boxes and imagining my new life in Florida, I also realized that if I was going to make change, maybe I was ready to make a big change. I had a contract in hand to join a highly respected pediatric group in Jacksonville. I was so pleased with that opportunity, but I also was reflecting, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to do a 29th year and a 30th year with something that I knew very well? Or did I want to experience something new? I recalled my dad saying, life is not a dress rehearsal. This is it. And I wanted to grow. I wanted to explore new options. But there was pushback.
From?
My loving husband.
I can imagine.
Fully recalled the work that had been involved in obtaining that medical degree, the expenses that had been involved. He thought I might just be happier if I reduced my time commitment in medicine rather than starting over. He also kindly pointed out what he suspected were my patients as families waved to me across a restaurant, or would call my name as I was walking in the community parade at 4th of July, passing out Frisbees, and he didn't want me to leave them.
This guy is a master. He knows how to lay it on.
But I also had good friends to take another crack at exploring my notions with, and they were not on board. My nursing friend said, pediatrics is in your blood. You might regret this change. And she counseled me, or perhaps her, that at least I could go back to medical practice when I came to my senses. Another close friend said, doctors don't step down from a successful career in medicine. They retire from medicine. And my financial advisor was very frank with me. That's why I pay him. He said that people always get tired of their job, but they seek ways to hang in there for another 8 years. This is not what you should do.
But when you went to Jacksonville, by the time you moved to Jacksonville, the decision to get out of clinical practice had already been made. Is that correct?
So when I arrived in Jacksonville and was pending my credentialing with the state of Florida, routine credentialing, I contacted, of course with my husband's blessing, the practice who had kindly offered me this new position and explained that I was going to make a career change. And of course they were very gracious. But at that point in time, I had decided that I really wasn't walking away from pediatric medicine. I was walking towards a new opportunity, new experiences. I wanted to build new business skills. I wanted to use new knowledge, and I wanted to take a new chance. So I actually went into Florida real estate. I got my Florida real estate license, and I affiliated with a very well-respected company that had high-end training, so I would catch up as quickly as possible. And I positioned myself to help recruit medical professionals from other areas that were wanting to come to Jacksonville, a world-class medical community, and show them the homes and the neighborhoods and the amenities that this community had to offer. I tagged myself the doctor who made house calls.
That's great. I got to hand it to you for that. So it sounds like you actually you have an inborn feel for the very reason for the existence of a magazine. I was about to ask you when and from where did the magazine idea emerge, but clearly you have a sense of getting people's attention. So tell us more about how the idea of the magazine publishing came about.
Thank you. Well, in the process of advertising my new real estate services in our neighborhood magazine, I was invited to meet the publisher. He introduced me to Real Producers magazine, which is written for the top real estate producers in the region. And a short time later, he introduced me to a new publication from the same publisher called Medical Professionals. And at that moment, I knew that that was what I was meant to do next.
Yeah, sounds like exactly where you belong.
Yes.
So tell us about Medical Professionals magazine, and tell us some more about everything that's involved in getting a magazine started.
Well, Medical Professionals magazine had started in Augusta by Jeremy Rugeberg 2 years earlier. And this is a high-end monthly peer-to-peer magazine for the community's top physicians, hospital executives, and other healthcare leaders. And the unique format is that it allows these providers to share their professional and their personal stories in their own words so that we can promote learning and collaboration and referrals with one another. As a practicing physician, I understood that knowing the person behind a medical specialty degree increased my confidence in referring a patient to that person and knowing that they were going to receive the care that they were looking for. But I also know that understanding the why behind a practitioner's work can rekindle a person's own interest and enthusiasm for their work. Learning about another person's hobbies or travels or charities can spark new energy and richness in work and in life. So we're using this magazine as an opportunity for people to be exposed to something beyond their medical silo, exam room 1 and 2 and 3 and their 2 hours of charting at night, to building healthy connections in their own community.
Sounds like a really great way to stay nicely connected and nicely integrated with a discipline that you really loved and were actively a part of for nearly 30 years. It sounds like a great fit for you.
Thank you. And I'm excited because the physicians that I'm now interviewing and sharing their stories are excited about communicating with their colleagues and having this new networking opportunity. One of the other things that Medical Professionals magazine does in each of its communities is host a few special evening events to honor the published providers, to honor the hospital executives that were in print, but also to bring together the community businesses that supported the magazine so that they can network and connect peer-to-peer at a fun time, a fun event. And so we're lifting these connections off the page and bringing people face to face. I had the privilege of attending one of the Augusta social events, and the first physician I met was so excited because he's been referring to a practitioner for 8 years, and tonight they were going to meet. They've been in the same town for all that time, and that night they were going to meet because they were both in the same room.
Isn't that interesting?
It was fun.
I've had that. I think we've all had that same experience of sharing patients and sharing referrals with people that we've never seen face to face. This sounds like a brilliant idea. So, Medical Professionals magazine, it started in Augusta, Georgia. We know that it's in Jacksonville, Florida. Where else might people find it?
It's also published in Charlotte, Nashville, Denver, and is ramping up in Chicago, Greenville, Tyler, Texas, Tampa, and St. Petersburg.
So it's really on the move then.
I think it's going to grow because it has been well received by both the medical community and the business community.
I can understand why. So you've been in the process for quite a while now to get this publication off the ground. Tell us a little bit about what all is involved in starting a magazine.
Well, fortunately, I'm part of a franchise, so there is wonderful education from the publication company, and the flagship publisher, Jeremy, has been a wonderful coach. So I've had those supports. But I've also had the new business experience I was looking for by reaching out to a freestanding surgical clinic or radiology clinic and offering them an opportunity to showcase their business in front of these primary care physicians. Even reaching out to some of the luxury opportunities in our own community, whether it's a fine car or jewelry or travel, to invite them to represent their business in front of these medical professionals in the magazine and at these social events. So I'm networking in a brand new way. I'm also meeting amazing business owners and medical practitioners, and learning their stories has been inspiring to me. So it's a real privilege to be able to put those in print and let their stories be heard.
And I just have one last question for you about starting the magazine. Are you having a lot of fun, or are you a nervous wreck?
Oh, well, if you're doing it right, you've got a lot of plates spinning, and that can make you nervous for sure.
I bet.
But that's when you get back to your business coach and you regroup, and then you go back for it.
And we're recording some weeks prior to the actual first edition of the magazine. So by the time people hear this, some things would have changed. But I am interested in knowing how many more weeks do you have before we see the first issue?
We're hoping for a March launch. So it's coming up quick. This is the start of the new year.
We hope that this podcast will in some way contribute to your success, and I have absolutely no doubt that it's going to be successful just by hearing about your life up to this point. It's a very interesting story, Karen, and we do so much appreciate you sharing your story with us. And we are now at the point in the program where we want to turn everything over to you. The title of the podcast is Prescription for Success. And obviously you have a very successful story, but I'm going to relinquish the mic to you at this point and have you share with us the Dr. Karen Janson Prescription for Success.
Thank you, Randy, for your very kind words. They are appreciated. My prescription for success would have 3 parts. Number 1, have integrity in everything you do. And I learned this the hard way during my first few years in college. I was studying with my new roommate, who was writing a letter to the dormitory director because she was unhappy about the lack of condiments on the hamburger bar that night. After she completed her letter, she handed it to me for my signature. And to keep the peace, I just reluctantly signed it and returned it to her. A short time later, the dormitory director requested a meeting with me so I could explain my letter. Of course, I was embarrassed. And in addition to reprimanding myself to be considerate of all others, I also learned to be true to myself, to have integrity, to be mindful, be present, be accurate. Each time I entered an examination room, I focused myself by briefly reflecting, this family altered their day to schedule an appointment because they need assistance. They deserved me to be attentive and give my very best efforts. And that's been helpful to me. My second prescription for success is to ask questions. I understand there are times and answers available with a little research, and that's the path to take. But I've also learned not to be embarrassed by asking a question, not to hide behind silence. I've often discovered that other people in the hospital conference room or the medical boardroom had a similar question, and they were pleased that I spoke mine. In the business world, I've actually been taught to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and to ask them lots of questions. That's why you're working with them. So now I appreciate that asking questions ensures that we continue to learn, it deepens our knowledge, and it improves our understanding of the people we're communicating with. My last thought would be to take personal inventory of your life at regular intervals. Check in with your marriage, your partner. Review your relationships with your family and your friends. Monitor your health. Reflect on your spiritual connection. Update your life goals, your professional and personal goals, and include your wish list for fun. and make modifications when necessary so you can live your very best life. I would paraphrase an American author, Annie Dillard, how you live your days is how you live your life. And that's my prescription for success.
Well, there is a lot of wisdom there, Karen, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your prescription for success and this whole story of your journey up to this point. Again, I know that you got to be very busy at this point getting the magazine off the ground, but I'm confident that it's going to be a fabulous success. Before we go, I also want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners how they can follow you, how they can get in touch with you. If you have email address, website, whatever you'd like to share, please tell us.
Thank you. My email address is Karen.Janson, that's Janson, at medprosmag.com. That's Karen.Janson at pros, P-R-O-S, mag.com. And I do have a website. It's www.mpjacksonvilleandbeaches.com.
Well, once again, Karen, thank you so much for being with us, and we want to wish you all the best of luck with the magazine. I'm sure it's going to be a great success.
I'm truly honored to have had this opportunity. Thank you so much, Randy. It's been a pleasure to know you and to know MD Coaches.
And that brings us to the close of another episode of Prescription for Success. If you'd like to learn more about any of our guests, you can find lots of information in the show notes on our website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And rather than just give you the usual call to action to connect with our website, I've asked our esteemed producer, Jody Hanks, to join us today and share some of the reviews and comments that listeners have shared with us. So welcome, Jody. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dr. Cook. It's great to be here. I think this is a long time coming. We've had a pretty robust schedule of podcasting. It's nice to be able to finally get to some of the feedback.
Indeed.
So let's get started. Over at Apple Podcasts, we have a 5-star review from B. Leo. B. Leo says, incredibly insightful, highly recommended for medical students, interns, residents, and fellows who are aspiring to be successful physicians in a new era of medicine. Dr. Cook and his guests share their micro-autobiographies and their version of success, concluding with their prescription for success. A conversational podcast through the lens of experienced providers as if they were advisors to the 20 to 30-year-old version of themselves. How often do you get to sit down with a provider with decades of experience and hear their how and why? Well, here it is. I personally binged listened to it on a 3-hour car ride. No shame.
Well, that's really impressive and shows a level of commitment that I'm very proud that we were able to inspire that. So thank you, B. Leo, and thank you for recognizing that what we're providing, we hope, will be really good information, insightful information for people in the early parts of their career. That's exactly the people we'd like to reach.
Agree. And the next 5-star review comes from Z9Million. He says, RX for Success. These are wonderful for anyone in medicine or allied fields. They will energize you with food for thought. Awesome.
Well, thanks very much for those kind words, Z9Million. We really appreciate it.
And another 5-star review from AKM71. Great podcast. This is a great podcast whether you are in the medical field or not. There are great discussions around what it takes to be a good leader, a good contributor, and professional growth. Thank you for these.
And I'm very happy to hear that, Jody. Indeed, we're not restricting our guests, as the regular listeners will already know. We have had not only physicians and nurses, but also healthcare executives as well. And we're happy to have people in those fields join us as well. And thank you for those comments, AKM.
And another 5-star review from Deb Jinks, who is a nurse. These series of podcasts are valuable to anyone in the healthcare industry, whether physician, nurse, technician, or anyone interested in improving the delivery of care. Thank you, Dr. Cook, for a fascinating look at some of the more interesting and awe-inspiring professionals in the field.
And thank you, Deb Jenks, for being a listener. And this gives me an opportunity to say how grateful I am that we do have nurse listeners. I can't imagine that there is a doctor among us anywhere who wouldn't agree with me that it is the nurses that constitute the entire professional infrastructure that keeps the delivery of health care in motion, at least in this country. And we're delighted to have nurse listeners. And Deb Jenks, I hope you will recruit some more nurse listeners for us.
Hear, hear. Another 5-star review from Franz Werfel. More than a medical podcast, he says. I'm not a doctor, but I enjoy listening to this podcast. Dr. Cook and his guests discuss how they got from point A to point B in their career, then take a look back with advice from their journey. The discussions are insightful and sometimes surprising. Although they reference medical procedures occasionally, it's not at all distracting for the non-medical listener. I think these discussions are relevant to any business professional, but would be especially useful to young doctors and medical students.
And thank you for that, Franz Werfel. We really appreciate it. And in fact, again, to emphasize the breadth of information that we're trying to provide, we hope to reach not only doctors and nurses, but healthcare executives as well. And we hope we'll be meeting more of those as time goes by.
And I think we will.
And what else have you got for us, Jody?
Well, the last Apple Podcast review is another 5-star that comes from Simons J. It says, Pearls of Wisdom. I really like this podcast because it gives real-world advice on leadership and what should be valued in the workplace. Whether you are a physician or not, RX for Success is worth your time. And
I am happy to know that we are worthy of that title, Pearls of Wisdom. Thank you very much.
I agree. And over at Patreon, James Etten says, Dr. Randy Cook's podcast for success was very enlightening and gave great examples of the challenges in healthcare we face every day and throughout our careers. The recommendation for success clearly expressed Dr. Cook's passion and gave innovative suggestions for empowerment and future achievements.
Well, thank you, James Etten, for those very kind words. We hope that you will continue to follow us, in addition to all of our other listeners. And thank you, Jody. I really appreciate you being here today to share the comments with us.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Thanks very much. And thanks again to all of you for listening. Remember, you can contact us with a question or a comment by going to our podcast website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com/contact. And if you'd like to leave a 5-star review and a comment we can read on the air, you can do that at Apple Podcasts. You can find that at rxforsuccesspodcast.com/Apple. And remember, the ratings and reviews really help people to get to know the show, and they help us to know what sorts of things you'd like to hear and how we can improve. And finally, if you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/RX4Success. You'll be helping us keep the show on the air, and you'll gain access to members-only content. So thank you very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.